So, Councillor Cressy, did you want to give us a little bit of a welcome?
Sure. And listen, I'll be brief because I know people are very keen to dive into what's in front of us. First of all, just before we get into the neighborhood plan at hand and the designs, I just want to say I hope everybody's okay, is doing well and okay. It's been a tough year and a half. These virtual meetings, I don't care how long we've been doing them, they're still challenging, even, you know, as we know tonight for all of us getting in here. And so I hope you're doing well. I hope you're holding up and listen, light is coming at the end of this tunnel. This Bathurst Quay neighborhood plan, it would not have been possible if it weren't for, frankly, everybody across our community pulling together to make it happen. Members of the Bathurst Quay neighborhood, city staff, the school, the community center, the Canada-Ireland Foundation, Ports Toronto, you name it. Our Bathurst Quay neighborhood, this was a jewel in the heart of the city, but it was also because of the complexity, because of the multiple levels of ownership and operations, it was stuck. And a real credit to so many of you who've joined us here tonight. We came together to articulate not only a vision and a plan for the future, but one that was achievable. Like not a 50-year plan that we hope to see in 50 years, but a 50-year plan that had 1-year targets, 3-year targets, 5-year targets, 10-year targets. And that's what we're actually seeing happening right now. You know, there are 7 different pieces of the neighborhood plan in implementation right now. 7 different pieces, from the dock wall that's open to the new Corlick building, the executive building that's construction's about to start on, to the restoration of the silos, to this public square. I mean, 7 different projects involving multiple landowners. And I got to tell you, it's a $30 million piece of work underway right now in our community. And, you know, often you don't see it until it's all realized, but we're seeing in real time right now a vision starting to come together. And so I'm delighted. You know, I go to a lot of meetings. Every night I'm in a meeting like many of you, and we're talking about things we don't like. Well, tonight we're talking about our vision and implementing our vision, and how excited is that? So, you know, I've already spoken too long, but I would be failing in my duty if I didn't acknowledge Brian Bowen, who's going to lead us here tonight, because, you know, members of the community have demanded more for this neighborhood for a long time. I've, you know, yelled and screamed and pounded tables, but Brian Bowen, on behalf of our City of Toronto team, has gone and actually achieved this. This is, in so many ways, his baby that we should feel so proud of. And so I'm looking forward to the meeting tonight. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I can't wait to see this next piece of the neighborhood plan implemented. And let's all thank Brian Bowen, because my goodness, it wouldn't be done without him. So there you are. Carla, back to you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Cressy. And it's actually back to Brian, who's going to give us the update.
Wow. Well, firstly, Joe, thank you so much. No pressure at all, but that's very, very kind of you. And we're thrilled to share the work that we've done and are doing. So why don't we jump right into it? So I'm just going to do a quick check here and make sure that my title page is still up there on the screen, Carla. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks to just under 15 minutes, and these remarks are going to provide some helpful context as Councillor Cressy has already begun on the Bathurst Quay neighborhood plan, including the plan's origins, the progress we've made to date, and how the conceptual open space designs we're discussing this evening fit into and represent one piece of a larger puzzle. And I deliberately use the word puzzle because the Bathurst Quay neighborhood plan, or the BQNP as we often call it, is essentially that. It is a series of puzzle pieces or projects of varying size and complexity that are each carefully coordinated with one another, so that when they're all eventually set in place, they add up to a complete picture of reclaimed and revitalized public space in our waterfront's Bathurst Quay neighborhood. And if you'll permit me to stretch this analogy just a step further, the public open space we're discussing tonight is not only a critical puzzle piece, but in many respects, it is the glue, it is the critical stitching layer that ties all of these various parts and projects together. And so to better understand how these pieces were formed and will fit together, I'm going to walk us through just a brief look at the project, the Bathurst Quay project, through 3 lenses. So first at the neighborhood scale, which is of the overall Bathurst Quay neighborhood plan, then sort of zeroing in on the Canada malting property, and then finally I'll hand it over to our terrific team at PFS Studio to give us a presentation on the waterfront plaza designs that we're really here to focus on this evening. And so the Bathurst Quay Neighbourhood Plan actually has its origins, as many of you on the call will know, in a proposal to introduce jets and to build a runway extension at Billy Bishop Airport. The creation of the BQNP was initially requested by City Council as one of 4 tools requested and needed to assist in the evaluation of that jet proposal. And although that proposal was ultimately cancelled, Councillor Cressy and city staff opted to complete the BQNP because it was deemed important and necessary in its own right. And so the BQNP was approved by City Council in 2017 and contains a broad list of recommendations over the whole of the Bathurst Quay neighbourhood that include a range of neighbourhood improvement and waterfront revitalization studies, recommendations, initiatives, and projects of varying scales that certainly could not begin or be completed all at once. But an important reoccurring theme, as Councillor Cressy has alluded to and was hammered home in dozens of meetings in the creation of this plan, was to get started. The Bathurst Quay neighbourhood stressed they had seen enough grand plans with little action and were feeling a bit left behind in our amazing 20-year and ongoing chapter of waterfront revitalization, and wanted to know how the Bathurst Quay neighbourhood plan process would be different. And so that raises an important question of where to begin. What our team has recommended is starting with the Canada Malting property, which is a publicly owned landmark property and gateway to our waterfront, the Bathurst Quay neighbourhood, and the downtown core. This property came into city ownership in 1992, just a few years after the Canada Malting operations ceased on the site. And after a series of bold but ultimately unrealized adaptive reuse proposals for the malting silos, unfortunately began to cycle through a series of tenancies and uses that effectively carved up this important waterfront site into a series of individual turfs. Absent a clear path forward to revitalization, City Council at the time directed city staff to begin an exploration of selling much of the property off for private commercial development. So the results of that uncertainty over time are seen here and are well known to certainly members of the Bathurst Quay community and visitors to our waterfront. A series of discordant land uses on this property, separated by, when we started this project, in fact, nearly 700 meters of chain link and barbed wire fence, and a lack of clear edges with which to contain and define various transportation and construction storage uses from adjacent public open space on the waterfront. And many of the site's most important attributes, including, of course, Ireland Park, the malting silos themselves, which are heritage designated structures, the executive office building, and of course the water's edge itself, became difficult to access and were obscured by transportation infrastructure, ultimately falling into disrepair. So the action plan and conceptual master plan, which were developed at the end of the original BQNP process, and the image at the bottom I'm sure will be familiar to many of you who have participated in this process, sought to kind of invert conventional thinking about the path to revitalizing this property in 2 important ways. First, it said we're going to keep this entire property permanently in public ownership. And I think that's an important legacy of the BQNP process, that this direction is now not only unanimously approved by City Council, but is now well entrenched in our official plan land use policies. Secondly, the BQNP said we need to learn from the past here, that rather than start with another singular focus on reuse of the malting silos, we need to look to model the success of Ireland Park, model the success of the Portland Slip, and start with improving the 1.5 hectares of public property and open space that surround the silos. Build momentum and interest in reusing the silos, absolutely, but we need to avoid the idea that the whole property must await a decision about the silos' long-term reuse. The results of that approach first began to pay off on October 25th, 2019, with our fence breaking event to mark the start of construction on our very first project phase, the Western Channel Promenade, which was overseen by the city's corporate real estate management division. We opted for a fence breaking in lieu of a groundbreaking as a symbol of many partners, many of whom are seen here, including government, agency, and community representatives working together to tear down the barriers that separate Bathurst Quay from our water's edge. And I want to now briefly acknowledge Councillor Joe Cressy and his incredibly dedicated team for their leadership and support throughout this process and in helping us to reach this milestone and every milestone subsequent. We're tremendously in their debt. And so that fence breaking was on a Friday afternoon, and the very following Monday morning, our construction crew got right to work on repairing the Western Channel dock wall. This was a 14-month project delivered in 3 stages. First, demolition, you see in the top image. Second, structural rehabilitation in the bottom image. And finally, finishing materials consisting of more than 50,000 individually hand-laid granite cobblestones to complete a seamless extension of the Portland Slip Promenade delivered by Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto approximately 10 years ago. The end result is seen here, that now in lieu of that chain link fence that we tore down in October of 2019, we've installed this beautiful granite bench that runs the length of the promenade and have finally completed Ireland Park, opened in 2007, by properly connecting it to the water's edge. The promenade also creates a strong south edge for expanding open space north into the site, which again is going to be the focus of the conceptual design work that I promise we'll hear from PFS Studio on in just a few moments. The next puzzle piece in the Bathurst neighborhood plan is the redesign and reduction of transportation infrastructure on the site. There are a number of very complex legacy and intertwined land use agreements on this property that are complicated, and I don't believe something that we can cover in any great detail this evening. I do want to assure you, however, there was no scenario here where it was as easy or as simple as simply flicking a switch and removing all transportation infrastructure from this site. But in the spirit of the partnership that forms the BQNP, we've invited Ports Toronto to the table to see how we could work together to make their footprint on the site as small as possible, and to look to other waterfront precedents to see how different discordant and transportation uses can coexist alongside public space, make them as physically and visually inobtrusive as possible, and importantly, seek efficient and shared use strategies for these spaces wherever we can. And we'll talk a bit more about that in the design presentation. We've also completed a study with our partners at the Waterfront Neighbourhood Centre and MJMA Architects to explore how to improve the current south-facing emergency exit for this community hub into a new threshold that connects the community centre directly to and from this future public space. And getting back to the parking area, to use that parking area to also provide a safer and more convenient lay-by for the Waterfront Neighbourhood Centre's visitors that rely on Wheel-Trans pickup and drop-off. The Bathurst neighborhood plan also directed city staff to seek a partner for the restoration and animation of the former executive office building for the Canada Malting Company operations, a building that, like the rest of this property, had cycled through a series of short-term tenancies and had fallen into disrepair. And so the city has signed a nominal lease with the Canada Ireland Foundation, which is the nonprofit's arts and cultural organization behind the construction of Ireland Park on this same property, with the foundation's intent here to create and operate what is to become known as the Corlick. And so the Corlick is planned to function as a public cultural institution that engages diverse audiences through programming focused on Irish Canadian culture, multiculturalism and Indigenous peoples, and migration. The building's mixture of both contemporary and historical programming are planned to include a range of live performances, a creator's in-residence program, culinary events, cultural classes, and exhibitions, presentations, and collections. One of this building's strongest features is, of course, its waterfront setting, and we will be hearing from PFS Studio how the important south face of this building will connect seamlessly with the adjacent public space so that programming in the Corlick can, on special occasions, spill out of the building and help to animate the waterfront plaza. And so speaking of programming, the real heart of the Corlick is this space seen here. This is the building's planned main event space, which through the removal of an existing floor assembly will be transformed into this inviting and dramatic double-height, multi-purpose performance and exhibit space. Also seen here are the generous sets of south-facing doors, which will create a connection between the Corlick interior and the water's edge. And just a brief plug on behalf of our partners at the Canada Ireland Foundation. Ahead of the start of their construction work at the end of this summer, the foundation has invited a group of artists from varying cultural backgrounds to install temporary murals depicting their respective cultural mythologies on the walls, ceilings, and floors of the Corlick building. This exhibit, pending COVID restrictions, is expected to be open for viewings in July via online registration, and so we'd like to encourage you to check out the Canada Ireland Foundation's website for more information. Turning now to the malting silos, also starting this summer, the city is set to begin a strategic two-part approach to their rehabilitation. Part one, repair, is focused on delivering a state-of-good repair program that will allow us to remove the perimeter fence around the silos so that these heritage-designated structures may become a safe and fully integrated component of adjacent public space. This work includes needed repairs to the structure's roofs and elevations, and completion of necessary below-grade work now in order to avoid disrupting our landscaped open space later. Those works include waterproofing the foundation and installing hydro duct banks to reconnect the building to electricity in support of its planned reuse. Part 1 of this phase 1 repair also includes the creation of a pedestrian portal at grade between the north and south silos in order to improve connectivity through the site and to the Portland Slip's water's edge. And this is an important feature in the plaza design that we'll be speaking about in just a moment. After this Part 1 work is underway and consistent with a City Council direction contained in the BQNP, the City and our partners at Quay will commence a proposal call process to solicit arts, community, and or culturally focused adaptive reuse partnerships for the silos, which we anticipate will seek to leverage the amazing views from the silo rooftops seen here, as well as the silo's dramatic, unique interior spaces and volumes. We'll have more details to share on that RFP process in 2022. Staying with the silos for just a moment longer, hopefully many of you were able to attend the Big Art TO projection on the malting silos last October, seen here, which was curated by the Bentway, Toronto Culture, and Waterfront BIA. This concept has prompted a multi-partner exploration of how to make this idea a permanent and year-round possibility for the malting silos. And so to that end, with funding generously provided by our project partners at the Waterfront BIA, we have worked with Moment Factory, which is a Canadian company and a world leader in creating immersive multimedia environments, to develop a feasibility study for the design and installation of permanent audiovisual equipment on this property with which to enliven and animate the silos as outdoor canvases for displaying public art, film, and possible custom surface mapped projection shows. And I want to be very clear on this point. The implementation of this concept is not yet funded, not yet in this current scope. However, Moment Factory's findings and recommendations are being incorporated into the open space design we're discussing this evening in order to future-proof the site to support a hoped-for implementation of this exciting concept. The City, Waterfront BIA, and various cultural partners are developing an exploratory committee right now to examine possible funding sources and next steps. Consistent with the BQNP, we are also exploring opportunities to animate the water's edge with new marine uses. This includes a lease signed last year in the Portland Slip with the Children's Focused Floating Theatre Company, and as part of our completed dockwall project, have sized and installed mooring bollards suitable for accommodating visiting tall ships along the new Western Channel dockwall promenade in the future. And consistent with the recently completed marine strategy study, which was led by our partners at Waterfront Toronto, in tandem with the City of Toronto and Ports Toronto, we'll also start exploring the possible introduction of new water-based transportation along the west side of the Portland Slip. And finally, beginning this fall, the City of Toronto's Street Art TO mural program will begin consultation on the design and implementation of a mural on the western blank wall of the community center. This will form a backdrop for adjacent streetscape improvements that we'll also be discussing in a moment. So that's effectively an overview of everything in the Bathurst neighborhood plan that we're really not discussing, or at least focusing on this evening. Instead, coming full circle back to the beginning of my remarks, what we'd like to focus on again is that critical puzzle piece I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, which is that public realm layer that stitches all of these improvements together with which to achieve a coherent identity and a sense of place. And we're absolutely thrilled that after running a competitive RFP process last year with very strong submissions from landscape architectural firms from right across Canada, we have brought PFS Studio on board to help us tackle this very complex but very exciting next project phase. PFS Studio is a leading Canadian landscape architecture, planning, and urban design firm based in Vancouver, BC, which works nationally and internationally on a wide range of projects, including many successful local parks and open spaces, such as Grange Park and Sherbourne Commons, seen here. And so in just a moment, we're going to hear from Jennifer Nagai and Vin Van from PFS Studio, who will be describing their conceptual designs for each of the following three main scope components. The first is a flexible and multi-purpose waterfront plaza that is primarily oriented towards day-to-day passive and local enjoyment of being near the water's edge. But like any public space on our waterfront, we do expect that this space will be expected on occasion to scale up to support occasional special events. And so they'll be talking to us about some ideas of how to make that happen and support a range of uses and users. The second part of their scope is to develop, along with Ombrage, which is a Quebec-based architectural lighting firm, an ambient architectural lighting strategy for the malting silos themselves, which we envision as becoming a sort of illuminated gateway marker, or analogous to a lighthouse, if you will, marking the safe western entry to our harbor. And finally, though a modest but important part of this project, PFS Studio is also developing designs for a quote pocket park space on Erin Quay, which is a very busy and important transportation spine in the heart of the Bathurst Quay neighborhood, and which we'd like to mark as a pedestrian exclusive gateway feature and gathering space for residents of this great neighborhood. So to reiterate, we are at a conceptual design stage at this point. Nothing you're going to see from PFS Studio is carved in stone. Your feedback, along with feedback from our Stakeholder Advisory Committee, I know a number of members of our Stakeholder Advisory Committee are with us in the meeting tonight. I want to thank them for being here. Our Technical Advisory Committee, and next week a presentation and feedback at Waterfront Toronto's Design Review Panel. All of that feedback will be used to inform decisions about refinements, changes to the design, and eventually adoption of a final design solution and subsequent detailed design work scheduled to start at the end of the summer. If you've been involved in these sorts of projects before, you might have noticed we're moving on a fairly accelerated timeline. This is because I'm very pleased to say that we are aiming to start construction of this plaza around this time next year, and of course in very careful coordination with both the silo rehab and the Corlick projects getting underway this year. And so with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Jennifer and Vin from PFS Studio.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. And good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. These types of meetings are so critical in terms of our design process. We recognize that open spaces, the success of them, perhaps the greatest measure of that is really whether they're embraced by the community. So a beautifully designed space devoid of people, I think it's missed its mark. So these types of meetings where we're just at the early stages of design, if we have this opportunity to share these ideas with you and gain your input, it's really important in our process. So I just want to say thank you for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to having a discussion at the end of our meeting. Next slide, please. You know, this is such an important site. So our presentation is divided into 3 sections. The first section is really just looking at the contextual framework that the site is positioned within. And all of you are familiar with the site, but we're trying to understand it from a policy point of view and understanding bigger initiatives that are happening around the site, so we can really respond at the site scale to this macro level planning that's going on around the city. So the first section will just talk about context, which will help you hopefully kind of understand where we're coming from as we approach sort of at the micro level, the scale itself. And then at the end of the presentation, you'll see some renderings and some diagrams that just help you understand how the design has been organized and the different layers or ingredients of the design. So the slide here is just really positioning our site within the broader city initiative of the Core Circle, which is really a series of key open spaces that surround the downtown core. And the purple, the pink dot there is our site. And you can see that it's part of this green kind of necklace of open spaces along the waterfront. Next slide, please. And then if we look at the waterfront itself and the different initiatives that the City of Toronto and Waterfront Toronto have been involved in over the years, that this site, again, is sort of within that, sort of along the sequence of open spaces along the waterfront, but it's at this very important moment where it's at the end of the central waterfront development on the west side. Next slide, please. So if you kind of think of both of those layers coming together, our site is sort of at this gateway or this intersection of these really important broad city moves about open space and allowing the open spaces to sort of be the connective tissue that ties the various developed neighborhoods in the city together. Next slide, please. What we're really interested in understanding is making sure that we know how people get here, making sure that the site is really well connected and providing lots of opportunities for people to be drawn to the site. And so this is just a diagram that shows some key ways for people to move through the site. We know that the north-south spine along Bathurst and Spadina are really these connectors that bring the city down to the waterfront and vice versa. The waterfront promenade that Brian was speaking to earlier is shown in pink as it sort of navigates around the quays. And you can see our site in light pink, showing that the promenade sort of wraps around it, and the Bathurst streetscape allows that north-south connection to occur. And then as you move further west, there are the paths that lead you further along the waterfront. And what we think is quite interesting about this site in particular is when you think about the waterfront promenade that wraps around the shoreline, this site is the last open space before that path kind of moves further north. And we think it's a really interesting opportunity to create an important neighborhood destination along the waterfront. Next, please. Program is also hugely important. We know that there are lots of great open spaces that surround the site, and we really want to make sure that we get the ingredients right for this plaza. We want to make sure that we're providing what the neighborhood's looking for. We want to make sure that there's lots of different ways for people to interact within this space. We know people have different interests, and people want to come to the waterfront for different reasons, and we want to make sure that the plaza program is responding to that. So at this early stage, we like to kind of look around the site to understand what's being provided and how can we complement and supplement the different program that surrounds the site. So in this diagram, you'll see our site again in pink. Within the 5-10 minute walking radius, there's lots of great parks of various scales. The blue is showing you the water features. Green is showing you where we have some informal green space. Purple is showing the washrooms, and brown is showing the dog parks or off-leash areas. And you can see that just sort of generally that around our site, there's public washrooms that surround the site, there's water features, and there's informal green spaces. And the yellow, I'm sorry, are more event spaces. So really well supported and lots of different types of program, but this kind of gives us a sense of what could we provide within the park itself that would help perhaps fill in the gaps that we might see within programming. Next slide, please. I won't go into this too much because Brian gave such a great introduction to the site, but these are some of the images of the existing site for those of you who are not that familiar with it. The image on the upper left, you can see the sort of heroic silos that kind of emerge out of the ground plane on the east side. To the right, the wall that's part of the Ireland Park, and the Corlick building, the existing image on the bottom left and middle. And then the last image to the right is the Erin Quay streetscape as you look north. Next slide, please. And so as Brian was mentioning, we've had some great conversations with stakeholders and community members in the city, and we just wanted to summarize some of the key aspirations that we heard, and we've been using this as a way to help guide our thinking. Out of this conversation, we're hoping to build to this list to make sure that we're really developing a plan that's reflective of the community's interests. So starting at the top, what we heard was this is an important site. We really want to make sure that it's connecting to this great network of pedestrian and pedestrian networks, as well as the cyclist network, and make sure that it's a really connected piece. We really want to make sure that it addresses the existing program, which I was speaking to earlier, and make sure that we're providing a range of opportunities for people to engage. And we know that the site is hugely important from a historic point of view. There's so many wonderful layers about the site, whether it's the existing Ireland Park piece, the silos themselves, and the airport as a gateway. So there's so many wonderful layers that we think are important to respond to as we think about what makes this site unique. And lastly, we really want to create a place that functions on a day-to-day basis, as well as the occasional event, so that we're maximizing the opportunities for people to come interact with the neighborhood and really find moments for people to come together. Next slide, please. These are some of the images that we've been thinking about when we think about the site itself. And so you can see the image of the silos on the bottom left, the very beautiful wall that helps frame the east edge of our site. The bottom right image is the airport and this site as a gateway into the city, but along the waterfront as well. And what we find interesting is the upper left image is the old shoreline. And all of these different ideas we've been thinking about it as one broad theme about migration and the idea of movement and the idea of evolution, sort of things changing and transforming. So whether it's the shoreline that used to be further south and that's migrated to the north, or whether we think about the idea of migration and people coming to the city and Toronto being such a welcoming place. And then the image of the seed head and how seeds can often sort of migrate and then position themselves and then create a completely different environment. And that as a general narrative has been something that's been quite inspirational for us as we think about our design and what makes the site unique. And so here, just to summarize what I was just mentioning is, the idea of the evolution of the shoreline, the industrial heritage, Toronto as a welcoming place, and the gateway to the city. These are some themes that you'll start to see manifesting themselves in the conceptual design that we're about to share. Next slide, please. The inspirational image of the seed head. Next slide, please. And how that can be used in a very abstract way to organize the site and to kind of start to think about form in a really interesting and unique way that's very specific to the site. Next slide, please. And before we launch into the design itself, we wanted to just capture some of the rooms that we think are quite important. From the conversations we've had to date, the idea of creating very distinct rooms of various scales was something that we felt would best address the different program that we see happening within the site. So here you can start to see the various rooms that we start to carve out of the overall site. The streetscape improvement that Brian was mentioning on the far left, and then moving from the top of the drawing down, we're imagining an open space that's really part of the community and the park, Norway Park, as an extension from the west. A promenade in the east-west direction on the north side, as well as Corlick, that really addresses the relationship to Erin Quay, and then creating a series of open spaces or gathering spaces that are reflective of its adjacent edge. So whether it's the flexible plaza that perhaps is a little bit larger and to scale to the silos that face it, or the South Terrace that really is a response to the Corlick building and the programming that we anticipate there, as Brian was mentioning. And I'm now going to hand it over to Vin to kind of walk you through in more detail the current scheme.
Thanks, Jennifer. So this is a site plan of the overall design with all the sort of rooms that make up Erin Quay. It's sort of the idea of these rooms are to sort of spatially define it, but also have it complement and support each other through day-to-day activities, but also for occasional events. So starting from the south, I'll start going into more detail about some of these spaces. So we'll start with the South Terrace and the Corlick forecourt, and then move my way up to the flexible plaza space, the North Promenade, the North forecourt, and then lastly, the streetscape improvements. Next slide. So starting from the south, this area, the South Terrace, is quite important as it's sort of the terminus of the waterfront promenade. Here we created a monumental sun deck that's slightly elevated, and we slightly elevated in a way to maximize a seating edge along this deck. it's really to take advantage of the southern sun exposures that we do see currently on site, and also taking advantage of the lake views of Lake Ontario and Toronto Islands. To the north of this, sort of north and south this side, there's sloped pathways that connects visitors to the top of the deck, so people can move and occupy the deck freely and sort of circulate through it. Inside within this deck, there are landscape planters. So to the west of the deck, there's these planters that are sort of positioned in a way that create these intimately scaled spaces, and which are canopied and landscaped. So they provide a bit of microclimate within the space. To the east of the deck, it starts to open up and really allows visitors to have a wider aperture of the lake view. At the end of this deck, we've located a sloped lawn, which we think it's a perfect location for someone to sort of lounge and sort of watch the sunset or the sunrise, and sort of take in some of these magnificent views of the lake. Positioned, there's sort of like a planter position in the middle of the plaza, and we intentionally positioned it here to sort of allow opportunities for people to view the Ireland Park wall, and this is sort of like a new way to sort of see it, because the site was for so many years have been closed off, but we find that this would create opportunities to frame that threshold, but also allow opportunities to view the site. To the north of our site, which is the Corlick building, we've sort of framed a modest amount of landscaping on the on the west side of the building, which creates like a forecourt with seasonal planting and ornamental trees and a bench. To the east of the building, we created a modest-sized plaza that allows for a spill-out space for day-to-day activities. The idea of having a cafe that can sort of spill out on the south forecourt and also the north forecourt, and then also creating opportunities to support a spill-out space for an event that could happen within the Corlick building. Next slide. So this is a render that's taken from the west side looking east towards the Ireland Park Monument, but also to downtown Toronto and the silo in the back. So here you'll see that to the right of the render, you'll see the waterfront promenade that Brian had alluded to, that just was completed in 2020. And then in the middle of the image, you'll see the sort of raised plinth that offers a generous seating edge along that edge that allows people to really perch and sort of view the lake. And then you'll also see that we've captured some landscape planting to create a space that's more verdant within the sun deck. In the background, we've articulated a lawn that I just had spoken about. Sort of this area is meant to be a little bit more informal, a space for people sort of to lounge around and sort of to picnic if they really want. And then to the right of the deck, you'll see the extension or the newly renovated Canada Island Foundation with this idea of movable tables and chairs sort of spilling onto that space. Next slide. The next room that we'll look at is the Flexible Plaza in the North Promenade. So the Flexible Plaza space is framed by landscape planting on both the east, which is the right, and then to the left, which is the west. The idea of this is really to soften up the backdrop against the south silo. And on the west side of the room, we've articulated a sort of dense landscape planting that does a couple things. It sort of provides a softer backdrop, but also creates a visual and screening against the taxi drop-off. Nestled within the this landscape planting is what we're calling terrace plinths. And these are slightly raised plinths that acts as, that does a few things. It sort of allows for day-to-day activities to occur where people can sort of sit and lounge on the terrace, but also transform the site in a way where if there is an event happening, this feature really provides a space, a formal seating space for people to view events. The terrace plinths then wraps around to the northern part of the North Promenade. And we've done this intentionally to create seating and really to activate that promenade edge. It also does another thing where it creates a focal point and really interacts and engage with the newly constructed silo portal. The North Promenade is characterized by a double alley of trees, which gives it a strong vertical presence. And sort of these trees are sort of marching towards the silo portal, which gives a sort of a cue and a hint for that east-west connection. Next slide. So this is a sort of a render view from the promenade looking southeast. And it's sort of with the silo in the background. This render shows and captures an event that's happening, perhaps a small band that's occurring within the site. And you can see here that people are sort of gathering around the stage, and sort of the terrace plinths are used in a way where it's used as formal seating, and you sort of can view the activities and engage with the event that's happening. We've also purposely designed the terrace in a way where it faces the promenade, so you can sort of lounge in this area or sort of be within the space but not be in the space. You're sort of in the peripheral, so you can still be a part of the space. And then to the left of the render, you can see here the new punctuation of the portal slice. And here it really connects, and you can see that east-west connection that really connects people through the portal and then to the Portland slip. And in this render, we also want to show a high-level articulation of an approach for lighting the silo as well. Next slide. The room north of the flexible plaza is what we're calling the North Forecourt. And we sort of imagine this space sort of relating more to the site edges, and this relates to the waterfront center, waterfront school, and then to the west, it's the parking lot, and then to the east is the North Silo. So we've sort of designed the space where we created a large open forecourt that would spill into the entrance of the waterfront community center. We've done this intentionally so that if there were events or programming from the school or from the community center, that it could sort of spill out into that space. There's also ideas of using the parking lot on weekends. So how it functions now is that through the weekdays, it functions as a parking lot, but on weekends, there's opportunities to explore the idea of having different types of programming that can occur in the parking lot. There's an idea of even having a food truck plaza within the space on the weekend. So you can imagine grabbing food or a drink from the food trucks and sort of slowly trickling and making your way to the North Forecourt, maybe having a seat along the flexible lawn. And we've designed the lawn in a way where it's there's a high point to the north of the lawn, and sort of it slopes south. So you have these incredible views to the flexible plaza space, but then also to the water's edge. On either side of the North Forecourt, we've created landscape screening and landscape buffer just to scale down the space and create a buffer to the parking lot. At the north edge of at the north of the flexible lawn, we created a green area, which we're exploring the idea of having a community garden within the space, really to take advantage of the sun exposure. Next slide. And the last room is the streetscape improvements, which is located sort of at the northeast corner of Queens Quay and Erin Quay. And like Brian and Jennifer had alluded to, this is really the gateway to the Bathurst Quay district. What we've done here is we've made some modest changes. We've expanded the sidewalk, which formerly was currently is an existing lay-by. So what we've done here is we widened that to give a sort of a wider sidewalk. South of that, we created a moment where sort of people can pause and sort of rest and sit. Within this space, we've articulated a large seating plinth that's nestled within landscape planting in the back, and then behind the landscape planting is an existing building that will have an art mural. Next slide. And this is sort of the view on Erin Quay looking north. So you'll see, you'll sort of see Queens Quay in the background there. You can see how close the park, this pocket park is close to that intersection. And here we want to illustrate a moment where people can really just sit and pause and sort of reflect along Erin Quay. Next slide. So the next few slides we're going to show are sort of like site features and elements within our site diagrammatically. So we know that this site is well connected and is really framed by a lot of access point. To the east, you have the waterfront promenade along the Portland Slip, which is shown in the magenta. To the north, you have the school board and also the waterfront center, which is also connected directly to our site. And then to the west, a lot of the traffic is really coming from Erin Quay. And then, our intent is really to strengthen these connections. So you'll see in the blue, we've highlighted proposed connection within our site just to strengthen those access points. You'll see a very strong diagonal north-south line that takes you through the North Forecourt, the flexible plaza space, and then also to the South Terrace. We also have created a very strong east-west connection along the North Promenade, which connects you from Erin Quay towards the flexible plaza through the portal and then to the Portland Slip, and then also connecting back to the waterfront promenade. And then to the south terrace, we've kept it well connected with the Corlick building, but also with the Ireland Park, making sure that these places are located in a way where it's accessible. Next slide. This slide is showing the various focal points within our site. So we know that the site has very distinct elements, such as the silo, the Ireland Park wall, and also the Corlick building. So these are all existing features that we want to frame and want to enhance as we sort of go through the design process. We've also indicated different focal points within our site that's newly designed as well, such as the lawn, the terrace seating, and then the south terrace sun deck. And all to say is that we want to make sure that there's these interesting moments along view sheds, but also circulation pathways. Next slide. So Brian had already alluded to this a little bit, but the idea of creating lighting for the multi-silo is something really important to the site. We feel like it's sort of like a beacon to the site, and we sort of alluded to a render earlier showing how it would be lit. But the idea that during the day, the multi-silo can be seen from different vantage points throughout the city, and then also along Toronto Island as well. So we really want to capture this at nighttime. Next slide. And that's sort of scaling down. So that was at the city scale, but scaling down, we're thinking that the site lighting approach to the plaza is something more pedestrian scale, and it would be a lighting approach that would clearly be safe, but also inviting for people to use it at night. So this is something we're exploring right now, whether it's through pole mount lighting, whether it's lighting that articulates a seat wall, a geometry, a planter. So these are all things that we're sort of still exploring. Lastly, the North Promenade is such an important east-west connection. We wanted to make this identifiable and make it its own identity. So here we were playing with the idea of something that's very artful. So you'll see in the top images, something that's more artful that sort of draws people from Erin Quay through the North Promenade and sort of through the portal. It's almost like a gateway marker for us on sort of either side of the silo as well. Next slide. Seating is something that's important within our design, and how people occupy it in different ways is also important. We've created a variety of types of seating through sort of linear seat walls, some that are against landscape planting, so you have that sort of enclosure feeling. Some that are a little bit more softer, perhaps within the lawn, so you can occupy it a little differently, sort of lounging within the space. We've also created larger plinths, which will create more flexibility in terms of how you would sit, particularly the terrace seating within the flexible plaza. We sort of articulated it in a way where people can sort of sit along the edges, but also they can also sit within the plinth itself. So you'll see in the lower left-hand corner, the idea, lower left-hand corner on the right side, the imagery, you'll see that people are occupying the site along the edges, but also within the plinth itself. Next slide. This slide is looking at the planting approach to the site. We know that green space is very important, and we were taking more of an ecological approach to how we plant the site, and really looking at the ecology along the lake. Here we've identified various layers of planting. So you have sort of the ground plane, shrubs, perennials, but also these vertical layers that are very important. So the trees and sort of ornamental trees and larger shade trees provide seasonality, but also microclimate. And especially along the southern edge, where you'll get sort of a little bit more wind coming through the site, this sort of acts as a sort of a mechanism for microclimate. We've also planted a double row of alley of trees along the North Promenade, just to reinforce that that important connection, east-west connection. Next slide. And then the last few slides, we're going to show, we were testing out some program and the scale of these programs. So this particular diagram is showing an occasional event that could occur within the site. The idea that the plinth, which is highlighted in the orange, could act as a stage when events is occurring. And then within the zone, adjacent to the stage, this idea that people can sort of congregate and gather right up to the stage, but also people can interact with the event maybe peripherally in the North Forecourt or even along the terrace seating plinths. And all this diagram is just trying to show is that there's this idea that circulation can still occur throughout the site, going north to south when an event is occurring. Next slide. Another study that we looked at is the idea of a pop-up market. Whether it's a farmer's market or sort of a local market, you can see that we strategically place them along the promenade and also within the flexible plaza area where there's a lot of hardscape. and then trickling it down to the south along the promenade. And then we've also articulated this idea that this market could also spill out to the eastern side of the silo along the Portland slip as well. And to an earlier comment that I made about the food trucks, this notion of having food trucks within this parking lot that is probably not going to be used during the weekends could be situated within the parking lot, and sort of how people can circulate through the parking lot to get to the North Forecourt. Next slide. And lastly, the Corlick Forecourt, the Corlick building is such an important piece to the South Terrace. Here, the upper diagram is showing a scenario where there could be tables and chairs that supports a cafe. So you can see that there's seating on the south side, but also on the north side, and how people can really occupy the sun deck as well. So you can imagine getting a coffee and sitting along that the edge of the sun deck. The diagram to the at the bottom is showing an idea of if there were an occasional special event at the Corlick, that some of these activities can spill out and can be cordoned off. And then also still allowing for circulation to occur around the event. Next slide. And then we'll end off the meeting with a bird's eye view of the site. So this view is taken from the western side looking northeast. Northeast. You'll see the composition of the South Terrace and how it works with the flexible plaza space, but then also the North Forecourt. You'll also see in this view the North Promenade that connects you from Erin Quay all the way to the Portal Slice. And in this view, we selected this view and showed it in an events mode. So you'll see that there are tents, market tents that are located and positioned throughout the site.
So what are we doing next? So there will be a survey sent to all meeting participants. And this survey will be sent to you automatically because once you've joined the meeting and you've provided your email, you're automatically added to that email list. This is an optional survey, so there won't be any new questions and certainly not any new materials in the survey that you didn't see this evening. But we wanted to provide this to make sure that there was adequate and additional time for reflection and an option to provide more detailed written feedback. We had discussed as a team that we were going to provide 1 week for this. And I'm sorry, obviously I haven't had a chance to discuss this with the team because we're live in the meeting, but I think because a few people did have some difficulty joining tonight, we want to make sure that we get the video up and give people time to watch the recording and take the time they need to complete the survey. So we're just going to have a debrief with our team and discuss how much more time we need to make available, but I think it's probably more likely going to be about 2 weeks to complete the survey. Following the survey close, there will be a meeting summary developed that will be posted on the City of Toronto's Bathurst Quay project webpage. I know many of you know where that is, but for those that don't, the link to that project webpage will also be included in that follow-up email. So you can, what we'll do is we'll communicate to our various project partners and resident groups when that meeting summary has been posted, so that people have a chance to review the outcomes of this meeting. Next week, we're presenting a very similar design concept presentation to Waterfront Toronto's design review panel on Wednesday, June 23rd. Those meetings are much like this, open to the public and available to watch virtually. So if you're interested in hearing feedback from a range of experts in landscape architecture, urban design, ecological design, sustainability, that's the sort of very focused and detailed feedback we'll get at that meeting next week. That will bring a sort of near to a close this round of consultation on the conceptual designs, at which point we're going to reflect on and synthesize all of the feedback we've received from our 2 prior stakeholder advisory committee meetings, our technical advisory committee meeting, design review panel, and of course this evening, to advance some further ideas for incorporation into final designs. And those additional design details and final designs will be presented to various resident groups, to project partners, and to our stakeholder advisory committee. So that continued consultation will be ongoing, and we're always very happy and open to hear from people who are interested in a presentation to another group that perhaps we haven't even met or encountered yet, but has some interest in this project. If that's the case, my email address is available on the Bathurst Quay project webpage. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and we can certainly arrange that presentation. Forthcoming detailed design will begin. Detailed design, which is sort of layering in the kind of very finer grain details into the plaza design, will take place over the fall. Then we're moving into construction drawings and tendering with a view to start this construction around this time next year, which we're really excited to actually get going. And with that, I will, on behalf of our city staff team, including Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, with whom we're co-leading the plaza design, Transportation Services, we're co-leading the Pocket Park design and Aaron Key, and all of the various city divisions involved in this project. Thank you so much for your time and input tonight. I want to thank Dillon Consulting for their terrific job helping us set up and facilitate this meeting. I want to thank Councillor Cressy and Bush Ramir, who's on the line again tonight, for all of their tremendous support and leadership. And I absolutely have to thank PFS Studio, who've done a tremendous amount of work in a very short amount of time. And we're just thrilled with the work they're doing, and want to thank Jennifer and Vin and their entire team. And we're really excited to see where this all goes next. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have an amazing night.